Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Diptii Shah and welcome to my show, Artistry. Today I have with me a dating coach and relationships expert, Miss Valentina Tudose. Hello, Valentina, and welcome to my show.
Hello, Diptii. So nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Let's start from the foundation years, that is the teenage years, when it all begins. Are there any foundational things you wish you knew as a child?
Oh, absolutely. Everything that we are told, I think, in our formative years is in a way to blame for the fact that I have quite a busy job. In the sense that, I mean, I'm not complaining about having a busy job. In fact, I love being able to help people. But I think one of the reasons why so many people really do struggle in their adult relationships is exactly because there is no formal education on what does it actually take to have a successful, happy relationship. Our education in this space of happiness and relationships actually comes from Disney. And it's very much along the lines of love conquers all. Everything is wonderful once you meet that special someone and you're going to live happily ever after. Now, if we actually dug a little deeper in the modern conversations around relationships, and especially if we've been in some relationships, regardless of how old we are, we know it's not quite like that. So the few things that absolutely, I believe, should be included in the educational curriculum of teenagers and even children would be really to understand that actually it's very unlikely that, considering the length of our life, our life expectancy right now is much longer than in the old days when people didn't live until 70, 80, 90. It's very unlikely that you're going to have only one partner, only one person who magically will love you and will be everything for you. Actually, biologically speaking, we are not a monogamous species. We do not pair for life. And I actually personally believe that relationships are what I call people growing machines, which means through our relationships with others, our parents, our friends, but most importantly with our romantic partners, we discover who we are. The relationships in our lives give us this sense of identity, help us figure out, who am I? Even the word relationship, right, actually comes from the word relate, or being in relation to others. So how do I see myself from the outside, from the eyes of the people, or through the eyes of the people around me, informs me about myself. So the first thing that I would encourage parents who maybe are watching, or would be parents, wannabe parents, to teach their children is that relationships actually are hard work. They are not magical. They are just there to teach us who we are. And there isn't one other half that we will magically meet somewhere and know that everything will be perfect and everything will be perfect for the rest of our lives. Actually, it takes work, it takes skills, it takes us learning how to overcome challenges that helps us build solid, happy relationships.
Right. So coming out from the prince and princess story expectation, we step into the real world and start from there.
I was going to say, we raise our children on sandwiches of Disney and Frozen and all of this stuff. So this story is very, very prevalent. And what that means for a teenager is that I think not only the fact that we're in our teenage years, we deal with tremendous biological changes, hormonal changes that really destabilize our emotional landscape, but also love has such this magical let's say quality to it, or at least the way we see love when we grow up is just that it's magic. And if it doesn't happen the way we've seen it in the movies, it somehow means that we are not good enough. And the biggest issue that we have when someone doesn't choose us, it turns out not to be our Prince or Princess Charming is we usually make the conclusion that there's something wrong with us. So if I had a daughter or a son and they went through their first breakup, the first thing I would say to them is, this is not about you. This does not make you a worse person or not good enough.
So, Valentina, I passed school like 2 decades ago. I never had any relationship course, or a course on life skills where relationships are like the pillar of, our foundations, how we behave and, how happy we are in the future. So, what about today's education? Would you suggest any mandatory courses, or do you think what we are doing in school is enough today?
Oh, I think it depends on the school. Actually, as you know, I'm based in Hong Kong, and there are some international schools in Hong Kong who have started to include life skills and relationship skills education. And that I think is absolutely amazing. I myself have been holding these kind of webinars or in-person classes with teenagers from the ages of 15 to 19. And in these classes, we talk about things like, sexual development. How is the physical connection fitting in this whole space of relationships? We talk about consent, as in how to have a good communication between the partners and making sure that everyone is actually enjoying that. And these experiences have taught me that children and teenagers are extremely receptive and extremely curious. Of course, they laugh a lot, but I've been very surprised sometimes by some of these students who stood up in the middle of the class and started talking about love languages and talking about requirements and what is really important, having a vision, having good communication skills, speaking from one's perspective, not through blaming and complaining the other side. And I think these teenagers have a higher chance of having good relationship experiences as they spread their wings, so to speak, going to college or something like that. But I don't think this is the case for most schools. So I'm a big advocate of relationship skills education in all schools, and actually starting much younger than the age of 12, where people think, oh, actually, I should do something about this with my kids.
Right. Now, talking from the point of view of a kid or a teenager who's just experiencing this new feelings and undergoing some changes in his physical body. Now, where does this person go to and discuss any doubts, any reservations, any questions, if he has in his mind?
Well, ideally to the parents, but of course, this really depends on the environment of trust and support that this teenager has received from his family. So, of course, I think we cannot fault parents who also didn't receive any education in this space, right? Essentially, the two things in this life that matters the most, in my opinion, are parenting and being in a romantic relationships. And yet these two things, we don't really receive proper education early enough, right? When we get pregnant, we kind of think, okay, now I need to learn about this whole experience of bringing a baby into the world. But I know from all the work that I do with expecting couples or couples who've had a child, that very, very few parents are actually prepared for the changes that will happen in their relationship with the arrival of this child. And the first years of a baby's life are so transformational for the parents and the way the couple connects, that I think the last thing on their mind is the fact that our only relationship schools right now is our family. So a child grows up going to this relationship school by watching his or her parents be in a relationship. And if that model that we're showing our child or our teenager is a little dysfunctional or very dysfunctional, as it happens quite often, the child simply learns that that's how relationships work. If one parent struggles with anger, for example, and doesn't know how to handle that emotion, and maybe parents have an argument and they give each other the cold shoulder for a couple of weeks, the child learns that conflicts are bad, that you should not say what you feel, you should not express requests, you should not actually ask for what you want. So essentially, this is the dysfunctional relationship school that we go to. So from the perspective of a teenager or a child, if he or she has observed that there is support and trust, and that the parents are not judgmental, not critical, not immediately jumping to giving advice or telling the child what to do, being very instructional, then the child will learn that it's okay to go and tell mommy that maybe a boy in school touched a girl inappropriately, as it can happen because kids are curious about these things. So then the parents, instead of freaking out and, oh my God, saying all sorts of protect yourself, punch him in the face or something like that, whatever someone might say, can calmly and, maturely manage that situation. If that isn't the case, right, if a child does not feel comfortable enough in their own home environment, hopefully the school provides counseling and the ability for teenagers to go and speak to someone, because this is actually the biggest danger in my opinion. Teenagers very often, at least the parents that I've been talking to, or I've been holding all these online workshops with parents about how to talk to kids about sex, for example. And there is a natural awkwardness around this topic, right? Which both the parents and the children are feeling due to so many reasons. And very often parents says, yeah, but what can I do? Because if I raise this conversation, my child says, well, I know all this, I don't need to talk about it. But I think it's really, as a parent, knowing that these questions are going to happen, they are going to come up for the child, and educating oneself as a parent on how a teenager may experience this whole world of relationships and dating, that really is very, very important from a preparation perspective as a parent, right? Read up on these things that are very common these days, children identifying as non-binary, or teenagers, in their quest for identity, don't really want to call themselves he or she, and they're, more into the space of I haven't decided yet, undecided, or they or them. Very often parents come to me and say, how am I supposed to deal with this? I don't even know what it means. I've been thinking of my child as a girl for my entire life, and suddenly she says you have to call me them. Like, what is that all about? And it is a transition and a learning experience for a parent as well. Also understanding that, if I again may continue on this space of sexuality, actually having the conversation with the child that actually sex is a lot more than what you see in pornography. It's much more than just penetration. Being touched in certain ways is also a sexual act, and it requires consent. So there's a lot of this that actually, as a parent, we may not know, we may not be aware of. Right. So I would say education about these things really is not just what children need or teenagers need to go through, but the parents as well.
I would say this is an unconscious method of, transferring relationship traits to your kids, rather. What are some of the conscious ways that parents can train themselves, before they approach this topic with their kids? And as I understand, there must be some resources, some books that parents can, learn from. If you could give us some advice on that.
Oh, there are a lot of books in the space of relationships, as you can imagine, and I use quite a lot of them in my work. Let's say two of the books that I recommend to everyone is one called Attached, and it's got a longer name, after the word attached. But if you just Google Attached, is a book about attachment styles. And it's actually quite interesting from the perspective of a parent, because our attachment styles are created very early in life in relationship to our primary caretaker. So as a mother, it can be a very interesting read to understand how your child has become the teenager or the adult that they are through the relationship that they had with you. This particular book is very practical, and it gives people a very good understanding of how to determine if someone has that style. And I think it prepares both adults and young children or young teenagers to understand themselves better, because the most critical aspect of this education needs to be about self-awareness. If you understand how you behave, how you feel in a certain situation, this gives you power to change it. If our behavior is on an unconscious or subconscious level, we don't have the ability to change, to make a choice. The second book that is really interesting, again, from the perspective of reading as a parent, is a book called Wired for Love by a Dr. Stan Tatkin. And this book talks, again, in a similar way about the different styles that we have of connecting with each other, but also gives practical advice about emotional management and how to actually calm down our amygdala, this part of our brain that is very reactive, that is ruling the fight or flight instinct that gets us into trouble. So there's some very practical books that allow you to really understand yourself as a parent, and then with this knowledge, educate your child about this. When it comes to relationship skills, what I often recommend to my clients is actually a YouTube channel called The School of Life, which is a wonderful, wonderful connection of all sorts of long format and short format videos that talk a lot about the need to address things like childhood trauma, how our relationships with our parents worked, but also very basic emotional education techniques that everyone can learn. In the space of maybe sexuality, I usually advise parents to watch with their children TV shows like Sex Education, for example, which is a very famous, very popular Netflix show, which deals exactly with this topic of how to talk about sex and what is the life that teenagers experience today.
Valentina, in your course of work, what are the top 3 areas in terms of relationships or sex education that teenagers struggle with?
First of all, sexual identity. Like, who am I, and how can I feel confident, comfortable enough in myself to actually pursue a relationship with someone? As I said, relationships show us who we are, and through receiving validation and appreciation, through being liked by someone else, we learn that we are likable. We learn that we are worthy, and we learn that we deserve to feel happy. Many people who I see now as adults, in their 30s and 40s, who do not feel very confident, who don't really think highly of themselves, it's because their early relationship experiences have been very negative, in the sense that they were cheated on, they were maybe abandoned, people have rejected them. So if you want to support a teenager how to be more confident, I think it's very important to educate a teen that ultimately their value, their self-worth, or our value and our self-worth doesn't depend on what other people think of us. So instead, I would educate a teenager really to look more for internal validation, as in knowing that I'm okay, no matter whether this person likes me or not, whether this guy wants to date me or he chooses my friend, which is a common situation for teenagers. I think as a parent, supporting our children and actually teaching our children as they grow up not to seek this external validation, not to constantly need to hear, hey, well done, great job, but more supporting our children to learn to develop themselves and to make their own decisions about how certain things need to be. So teaching them to decide their own right or wrong rather than teaching them right or wrong. So this is number one, self-identity. Secondly, I would encourage parents to teach their child this idea of self-protection and what feels good, to follow their intuition, to if they already feel worthy and valuable because they have already learned this art of self-validation, they are going to be in a better position to also have strong boundaries with other people, which helps us define who we are. So teaching your child to be assertive, to ask for what they want, and to be very clear in what doesn't work for them. This behavior is not okay with me. This gesture is not okay. And this is what would work for me. So this whole seesaw of what I don't want to see and what I would like to see more of is a really critical skill. And I think the last part, which is connected to boundaries, is really to focus on building standards for ourselves instead of going into relationships with expectations. So I always say, keep your standards high, as in the things that you are not willing to tolerate, be very clear about those things and be very assertive in communicating them to other people, but also be willing and flexible when it comes to setting expectations. Because unfortunately, this whole program that love is going to be amazing and love is all it takes sets us in a position where we just expect people to do things for us. And that gets us into trouble and makes us feel rejected and bad.
Only if life is so simple.
Yes,
Because,
well, it's not, right?
yeah, and love is, I think, the most what do you say, most well sold product. Everyone buys it. Yeah.
Well, everyone has a fundamental need for it, right? It is what, to me, love from the outside teaches us how to love ourselves, which is why it's so important, because I think that's our primary goal in life. But that's maybe me, because I'm a love doctor. So what else can I believe?
Thank you so much, Valentina. Where can people follow you and find you?
The easiest way to find me is maybe going on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Valentina_relationship coach, or to visit my website. I have two of them, but I would say go to my primary website, which is www.happyeverafter, not happily, happyeverafter.asia. But I do believe that we can be happy ever after, but only when we learn to love ourselves and not depend on others.
Right. Absolutely true. Thank you so much for your time. It was such a pleasure to have you on my show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your viewers.
Thank you.